blockbusters and news reports of impending catastrophes have helped establish the public's image of a volcanic eruption as lava streaking down a mountain slope. But in many instances, the reality is something far less photogenic: mud. On November 13, 1985, the Nevado del Ruiz volcano in Colombia, South America, erupted. 30 miles away from the 17,700-foot peak, mud buried the town of Semeru in one of recorded history's most devastating volcanic tragedies. A wave of ash, mud, and water that reached as high as 50 feet left survivors shell-shocked. Magma released during the double eruption of November 13th melted as much as 10% of Mount Ruiz's ice pack, producing a tidal wave of mud that swept down river valleys on the volcano's eastern slope. In Semeru, as many as 25,000 people perished.
How old is this little boy, Luis?
6. He don't know where is the family.
On Mount Ruiz's western side, there was still more tragedy when in the town of Chinchina, another 1,000 people lost their lives. Thousands of miles away, Iceland faces a similar potential for tragedy. Just 200 miles south of the Arctic Circle, the small island is home to hundreds of volcanoes. As many as 40 lie submerged and unseen beneath hundreds or thousands of feet of glacial ice. An eruption could unleash billions of gallons of instantaneously melted water in what the Icelanders call a jökulhlaup, a glacial run or flood. On the enormous Vatnajökull Glacier, where the thickness of the ice averages 3,000 feet, such a glacial run occurs every 5 to 10 years. In October 1996, the results were particularly devastating. An underground volcano erupted with little warning. The intense heat quickly melted the glacier above, and 3 billion tons of water flooded the countryside.
When the river started to flood, you could see that the precautions that had been taken were working. But then the water just kept increasing until it got to the point that it took out the bridges as well.
With glacial melts a regular occurrence, government disaster agencies quickly mobilized, but found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the flooding.
In Iceland, we know roughly where the volcanoes are and where we expect these catastrophes to happen, but the scientists have told us that we should worry and we should prepare ourselves.
In the winter and spring of 1980, scientists studying Mount St. Helens in the state of Washington in the U.S. knew an eruption was imminent. Seismic activity was at an all-time high. Thousands of earthquakes were recorded near the mountain. The 9,677-foot-high peak, which had been dormant for 123 years, roared back to life on May 18th at 8:32 in the morning, triggered by a 5.1 earthquake a mile beneath its base.
The mountain was totally encompassed in ash. You could no longer see it. It was black as night, and it looked like it was coming straight for us. And I thought, well, if I'm going to die, I'm not going to run. I'm going to stand here and watch it come, because it's just a view of a lifetime.
Mount St. Helens was the deadliest eruption in United States history. 60 people lost their lives. residents of the Pacific Northwest received a bracing reminder of Mother Nature's power.
I've seen the damage, I've seen the blast, I've seen the impact on people, the suffering, the flooding, the loss of lives, all of those things. And I have respect for the awesome power of Mount St. Helens.
I feel the ash now in my eyes. It's getting very hard to breathe. Oh, dear God.
Pilot Bruce Judson was flying his private plane over the mountain as the eruption began.
I just kept screaming at Seattle Center that the mountain has erupted. You need to evacuate, notify the proper authorities.
Seattle Center, 86 Charlie, the whole north side of the mountain just went. 86 Charlie, say that again, Lynn, nice and slow. How much of it caved in? The whole side.
In less than 15 minutes, ash and columns of steam shot up 60,000 feet into the atmosphere.
As we were looking down inside the crater, you could see the inside of the crater start to fold in and start to fall, and a rock slide.
Throughout the area, the eruption jolted residents and campers from their sleep.
With the same terror that I woke up with, I jumped out of the tent, and with a dive and a roll out of the tent, I was underneath the log, and that's when the initial blast hit.
Brian Young wound up buried alive. He was lucky enough to escape. Many others cannot tell their own stories.
Of the 6 of us that started our camping trip, only 4 of us made it out alive.
David Johnston, a volcanologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, was at his observation post just 6 miles from the blast.
The message that Dave radioed to us on the morning of May 18 was, Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it. This is the eruption that we've been waiting for.
Those were the last words anyone heard from Dave Johnston.
It was really a tragic situation, and it impacted all of us. Then I began to have thoughts like, why Dave and not me? If the eruption had been 1 hour later at 9:30 instead of 8:30, I would have been there too.
By evening, Mount St. Helens had gone back to sleep. In just a few hours, the volcano transformed the lives of thousands of people and turned a classic cone-shaped mountain, once known as the Mount Fuji of America, into a horseshoe-shaped crater. More than a quarter mile of mountaintop simply disappeared.
Although it appears to have gone back to sleep, it's a volcano that could reawaken at any minute.
For thousands of years, human populations and volcanoes have shared an uneasy coexistence. Mexico City, congested and sprawling, is one of the world's most populous and fastest-growing cities. Thousands move here every day in hopes of a better future. Looming just 45 miles from the city, 17,930 feet high Popocatépetl. It's been called the world's most dangerous volcano. Though it hasn't had a major eruption for more than 50 years, Popocatépetl, or Popo, rumbled to life in 1994 and again in 1996, reminding its millions of neighbors that they live on the doorstep of a potential killer.
The biggest eruption of Popo would displace or kill maybe 10 million people. Mexico City would essentially cease to exist.
Scientists realize that if they can predict a catastrophic eruption far enough in advance, they could give Mexico City residents a chance to get out of the way. But as recent hurricane evacuations have shown, moving millions of people on short notice presents a logistical nightmare.
There aren't facilities to handle that. And actually, there couldn't be facilities to handle that. We can't prepare for disaster on that sort of scale.
Moving out of harm's way became a very real concern for the comparatively tiny population of Montserrat. In 1995, the British colony's 12,000 residents waited and wondered if the Soufriere Hills volcano would erupt for the first time since Columbus visited the Caribbean island in 1493. On July 18th, they got their answer when the volcano burst to life. Volcanologists from all over the world gathered in Montserrat to monitor the potentially deadly situation. Dr. Simon Young, a scientist with the British Geological Survey, was among those who ventured up the mountain.
We're standing right now pretty well as close as you can get to the Soufriere Hills volcano, which right at this minute is probably the world's most dangerous volcano. What the population are expecting is a big bang.
In August 1995, an eruption of magma, lava, and ash exploded from the peak blanketing the colonial capital of Plymouth. It was the beginning of what would be the end of island life for most of the colony's citizens.
We are fearful that it could all collapse in one go, and we could have a pretty major explosion here.
The volcano was like 15 fighter jet planes roaring into the mountain.
We heard a tremendous rumbling on the mountainside. I mean, really loud rumbling. And I said, my God, this is it. We're trapped.
And then stones start coming out of the volcano and start breaking windshields and stuff on people's cars.
You thought, well, that was it. I'm ready to die. It's all over.
And it was like, oh my God, Jesus, don't let us die. Jesus, don't let us die.
Just 40 square miles, the entire island of Montserrat is smaller than the city of San Francisco. The island's size gave residents few alternatives to evacuation.
The distance from Salem to where the volcano is not even 7 miles.
I get scared and afraid, but I'm afraid something might happen to the children and to my neighbors.
During the spring, summer, and fall of 1996, black ash billowed above Montserrat, occasionally reaching altitudes of 40,000 feet. Earthquakes, which had shaken the island since 1992, rumbled with increasing frequency. Finally, a suffocating cloud of superheated ash and rock, known as a pyroclastic flow, streamed from the peak, barreling downhill at 150 miles per hour, destroying everything in its path.
Black streak was coming across the sky. I mean, black as ink. Boom, 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 boom. This stuff started to hit the windshield.
Montserrat resident David Lee captured the moment on his video camera while trying to get away.
And it just got darker and darker. Lightning was flashing across the road. 51 seconds later, it was pitch black like midnight. I mean, inky blackness. It was absolutely scary. It was like the end of the world.
Helicopter pilots from the Royal Navy surveyed the damage to the British colony.
There's very little greenery left. It's poisoned virtually all the trees.
Where we're taking off, it's just completely green and you don't realise it's active, and then you just get over the ridge and there's just devastation everywhere.
The roads are covered in ash, a lot of the buildings have been damaged, and pyroclastic bombs actually puncturing holes in some of the roofs of the houses.
If this volcano blows, right, we could get tidal waves. This whole island could sink. The situation is getting really worse, and I think they should take us off the island. I don't think we should be here right now.
As the intensity of the volcanic activity increased, evacuations, which began shortly after the first eruption, also intensified.
We had the country in an evacuated mode. We had the vast majority of people out of the danger zone.
Initially, residents of southern Montserrat were relocated to the relatively safe northern portion of the island. People who had not long before been living a tranquil island existence found their worlds turned upside down.
It's hard to describe it. I've lived in a shelter myself. The first two evacuations, I was in the shelter, and the beginning of this evacuation. And I suppose the biggest lack is the lack of privacy, because you're all living, men, women, and children, all in together.
The evacuation is so frustrating. Sometimes it's unbearable. Sometimes I don't know what to do because it's so stressful.
Some people cannot go back home maybe for the next 5 years or more, maybe not at all.
Life on Montserrat may never be the same. Of the 12,000 people who once lived on the island, only 3,200 are left, and much of the island remains buried under thick layers of ash. In the Pacific Northwest of the United States, just 50 miles from Mount St. Helens and a 2-hour drive from Seattle, Mount Rainier rises 14,410 feet above the sea. Although dormant for more than 100 years, some volcanologists believe an eruption in the near future is a real possibility.
I feel very strongly, and I'm sure a lot of scientists would agree, that Mount Rainier is the most dangerous volcano in the United States.
An eruption of Mount Rainier could claim more lives than any other volcanic disaster in U.S. history.
It's not a matter of if one of these catastrophic flows is going to occur. It's only a matter of when. One could occur any year, at any time.
Perhaps no place in the world is better prepared for natural calamity than Japan. Home to more than 126 million people, the country regularly experiences cyclones, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. All this geothermal activity is the result of a massive subduction zone under Japan, where the Pacific plate of the Earth's crust thrusts beneath the Eurasian plate. With a long history of destructive earthquakes, Japan has established a massive effort to ready the population for future catastrophes. At a school near Tokyo, children take lessons in reading and writing as well as disaster readiness, skills that one day could save their lives. Although only 5% of the world's population lives near an active volcano, proximity has little to do with their potential for worldwide impact. Scientists fear that if a series of volcanic eruptions occurred over a short period of time, the tremendous outpouring of material into the atmosphere could have cataclysmic consequences far from the volcanoes themselves. Such a calamity is most likely to occur somewhere along the volcanic active rim of the Pacific Ocean, an area known as the Ring of Fire.
The most dangerous volcanoes in the world are the ones around the Ring of Fire, because these are the ones where the vents get plugged up, and instead of lava oozing out at the top, you blow the material out as pumice and ash.
Today, more than 400 active volcanoes threaten the hundreds of millions of people who live along the Pacific Rim. This hotbed of volcanic activity is home to the world's most violent and deadly eruptions.
Well, statistically, these things occur twice in every 100,000 years, so we're just about overdue for another one.
One of the most explosive volcanoes in history occurred on the Indonesian island of Krakatoa. Following a series of smaller eruptions, a massive explosion on August 27, 1883, plunged the area into darkness for 2.5 days. The noise was heard over 2,000 miles away in Australia. This archival footage of a 1925 eruption only hints at the enormous force released by Krakatoa 42 years earlier. That That explosion released energy greater than 25 of the largest hydrogen bombs ever tested. Tidal waves generated by the blast killed more than 36,000 people in the Indonesian archipelago, and a shock wave circled the world 7 times. On neighboring islands, the ashfall reached an astounding 200 feet. And the potential for devastation along the Ring of Fire has hardly ended. In 1982, Galunggung, a 7,100-foot-high volcano on the island of Java, exploded, causing the death of nearly 70 people and rendering more than 20 villages uninhabitable. It was, however, the eruption of another Indonesian volcano in 1815 that truly was felt around the world. Mount Tambora possesses the unique distinction of having been the source of the deadliest volcanic event in modern history.
The amount of material put up into the atmosphere was much greater than Krakatau. This led to the now quite infamous year without a summer, 1816, when the weather in Western Europe and northeastern United States was extremely bad. It snowed in June and July, crops failed widely, there was widespread famine. For Tambora, the number of people affected by the eruption is really unknown, but it must be in the possibly hundreds of thousands.
250,000 people are known to have died as the result of volcanic activity over the last 300 years. But an ancient explosion in Indonesia suggests the potential death toll could be much higher in the future.
74,000 years ago, Toba erupted and brought about a global volcanic catastrophe. The human population crashed from hundreds of thousands to a population less than 10,000, possibly caused by the environmental effects of the eruption.
Experts believe it could happen again.
If a volcano goes off in one of these remote places in the world and is large enough, it can have effects on the atmosphere, which are global and will affect the United States and the food supply in the United States.
The biggest eruption that we can expect, you would see something like 2,000 cubic miles of material ejected into the atmosphere. And this material will travel around the world maybe in only a few months, so that it cuts out a significant portion of sunlight reaching the Earth's surface.
This could trigger the entry into a new ice age.
It's rather like the scenario of a nuclear war, a so-called nuclear winter.
There could be years without a summer in the future.
And temperatures will drop and drop until you have freezing conditions all over the planet all the year round. I mean, there would be mass starvation in the developed world.
Imagine several years, at least, with no growing season. That's a worldwide famine. It would be a global disaster.
It's difficult to say whether it would mean the end of civilization, but it would be the most drastic natural event that mankind had faced for many thousands of years.
We have to be very aware of these changes. They're real. They can happen in the future. They will happen in the future.
It's not a matter of whether these will occur, it's just a matter of when.
Volcanoes possess the power to create as well as destroy. In Iceland, underwater eruptions gave birth to Surtsey, a new island that began to rise above the water in 1963. Not far away, the residents of the Icelandic island of Heimaey understand perhaps as well as any what it means to live in the shadow of a volcano. Descendants of the Vikings colonized the island more than 1,000 years ago. The men who fish these frigid waters also know the hazards of going down to the sea in the North Atlantic. The residents of Heme long ago learned to live with uncertainty, to meet risk and hazard with a cheerful face. It's a characteristic that has served them well.
I was 6 years old and I was asleep. It was like early in the morning when the eruption started off.
In January 1973, a mile-long fissure in the long-dormant Helgafell volcano came to life. Out spewed an endless stream of lava that immediately threatened to decimate the once peaceful village.
And my father opened up the curtains of the window and then just everything went red.
The men were running like crazy and shouting, "It's erupting. The island is literally splitting in half." I was so scared, I was shaking.
It has started raining, blowing pumice all over town, all black. Big chunks were just bombarding us everywhere you look. It was raining on us. All of a sudden, the vault just opened up right in front of us. That is when we realized that there was something really terrible going on. It was a frightening sight.
As the volcano continued to erupt, the population of 5,000 raced to leave the island.
The island was evacuated immediately. Luckily, all the fishing boats were in the harbor, so just everybody went to the harbor. And I remember the water in the harbor was really boiling hot.
Though the villagers managed to escape, their battle with the volcano had only begun. 33 million tons of lava and volcanic rock rained down on Heme, destroying more than 400 homes. Rescuers shoveled mountains of black ash from the rooftops. The following morning, they would return to find another 15 feet of debris covering everything in sight.
First, we were afraid that the ashes would bury the houses that were closer to the eruption. I packed some clothes and so forth. Then I just forgot about the house. The lava came up on the north side of it and broke it down. My house was no longer there.
Then the lava all of a sudden changed its course. It started heading for the harbor. Our lives here depend on this harbor.
A 500-foot-high wall of burning lava streamed out of the Helgafell volcano and with relentless force marched toward the town's harbor. Iceland was in danger of losing one of its most important fishing ports. Against odds too extreme to calculate, the citizens of Heme decided to fight back. 43 giant water pumps were shipped in, and 19 miles of pipe quickly strung together. Directing their hoses toward the advancing wall of destruction, the townspeople sprayed 4,000 tons of seawater per hour against the lava front, reducing its temperature by nearly 1,600 degrees. A brave group of Icelandic fishermen has stopped this seemingly invincible monster dead in its tracks.
It felt like we had just returned from fighting a war, except in this war we were not fighting each other, we were fighting Mother Nature.
There are houses under here and to the harbor. We are standing on top of houses.
6 months after the eruption began, the lava flows finally stopped. The population returned and continued the effort of digging out and rebuilding. John's new neighborhood was built on top of homes buried below. Today, Heme stands as the first community in history to go head-to-head with a volcano and win. Like the citizens of Iceland, most people who live near active volcanoes do so because of cultural and family ties to the area. Given a choice, they might choose to flee the shadow of destruction once and for all. But there are others who find themselves compulsively drawn to one of the Earth's most hypnotic spectacles. Maurice and Katja Kraft were such a couple. Their European home contained dozens of curiosities collected from volcanoes around the world. Well known and highly regarded for their photography and films, the Krafts were also extremely knowledgeable about the nature of volcanic activity. The couple regularly traveled the world to be present at the latest eruption. Kilauea on Hawaii's Big Island particularly interested the Krafts. There they followed in the footsteps of the many scientists who, since 1912, have made the Hawaiian Volcano Center a base for their investigations. It was here, to their great satisfaction, that the Krafts saw a new fissure open right before them.
What was wonderful was that we have seen really the beginning of a basaltic eruption. And this is fantastic because we had curtains of fires kilometers long, and this was in the early morning with the best light you can have, you see. So it was really fantastic.
After years of experience around active volcanoes, the Krafts felt comfortable taking what might look like extreme risks.
I like to be crazy because life is crazy, and a volcano is crazy, so everything is crazy. And if it can stay crazy for many years, it's okay. At the meantime, I want to understand how volcanoes are working. I would like to make a canoe in Titane or something like that, you know, and to go down a lava flow in a canoe. That must be fantastic, taking temperatures and taking viscosity measurements and so on in the flow when going down. I would say if I had died without looking at a volcanic eruption, I had died like an idiot. Everybody has to see a volcanic eruption from near, and I cannot live without volcanic eruption. If tomorrow I die on a volcano, not important.
Though Maurice Kraft had been transfixed by volcanoes since he first saw one as a 7-year-old boy, he never got his wish to ride the rapids of a lava flow in a canoe. In June 1991, while observing an eruption of Mount Unzen in Japan, the Krafts were trapped in a pyroclastic flow that, like a cascading avalanche, unexpectedly shifted its course. In a huge blow to the worldwide community of volcanologists, the Krafts perished with more than 40 others. But as Maurice Kraft might have said, the freak accident was a risk he was willing to take in order to witness the wonder of Earth as it simultaneously creates and destroys. Volcanoes, mercurial, incredibly potent, deadly. A window into the inner depths of our planet, and an awesome reminder of nature's overwhelming authority.
Stay tuned to witness phenomenal rescues by Coast Guard helicopters and their crews, coming up next. And tonight at 9 Eastern and Pacific, don't miss the critically acclaimed special, Building the Great Pyramid.